Hello and welcome to Threads 2024. I'm delighted that today I have this opportunity to talk with Professor Frans, who is a prominent scholar and a leading scientist in biology and primatology. So our theme this year is evolving, and I think Professor Waal is the best person to give us the big picture of how we have biologically evolved through our long history. Professor Waal, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and welcome to Threads.
Thank you.
My first question is very basic. I assume that not everybody in our audience know about primatology. So could you please give us some hints about primatology, what you do, what your research is like, and your field work maybe. So what does it look like to be a primatologist?
Well, primatology is not defined by the questions we ask, it's defined by the group of animals we work with, which is the primates. And the primates, there are 200 different species, roughly divided usually between monkeys and apes. And the monkeys are the vast majority. They are primates with tails. And then the apes are large primates without tails. And so we belong to the apes. I know that some people will not see themselves as apes, but I look at humans and apes as basically the same group of animals. And the closest relatives we have are chimpanzees and bonobos. And I happen to be a specialist of those two. And my own work has been mostly in captivity at primate centers and large zoos. But I also have had many students who worked in the field. And I've worked on elephants also a little bit, which don't fall under primatology, I can assure you. I'm interested in animal behavior in general, and especially in the intelligence and the emotions of animals. And so we do usually observations of them, sometimes experimental studies, but never invasive studies. So sort of experiments where you see, do they want to share food under certain circumstances, or how do they use a touch screen, and do they understand the problem that we present, that kind of things we do. And so that field of animal cognition is of course getting very big, because every week you read in the newspapers and on the internet about new discoveries for all sorts of animals, not just the primates, but now also for the octopus and for the insects and for fish, for all sorts of animals. And so that whole field of animal cognition is getting quite big at the moment.
So let's jump into one of your very interesting ideas about the evolution of morality. So you talk about two pillars of morality, one empathy, one fairness, and you say that we can also find these two capacities in primates as well, and maybe in other animals. So can you talk a little bit about your theory?
Yeah, so empathy is something that I've studied for 30 years, 40 years in the primates. And that started with how they respond to someone who's in distress. Mm-hmm. So if one of them has lost a fight or has fallen or is injured for some reason, the others respond with what we call consolation behavior. They come over and they embrace and they kiss and they calm down the individual who's distressed. It's a very common reaction in chimpanzees and bonobos. And I got interested in that. And in humans, we call that an act of empathy. And I feel we should interpret the primate behavior the same way. And after that, after the studies on the primates, we now have studies on elephants and rodents, dogs, because empathy also occurs in all the mammals. And so, for example, in dog studies, people bring a dog into a family and ask one of the family members to cry, and then they see how the dog responds. And the dog also will approach the individual and lick their face or whatever they do. And so empathy is actually a very common mammalian reaction. And so I got interested in that. And I think empathy is at the core of human morality, is that you cannot be a moral being if you're not interested in others. If the situation of somebody else doesn't affect you, why would you be a moral being? And there are even people like the Dalai Lama who will say that that morality can be reduced to compassion, that compassion is the core, and without compassion, there's nothing. So I think it's extremely important capacity, and I'm not saying that these primates are moral beings the way we are, but they certainly have the beginnings of it, let's say it that way. And then fairness, that's a very different issue. There's a very famous video clip that we put on the internet and that has now been seen by 200 million people of two monkeys who sit side by side, two capuchin monkeys, and they need to do the same task. If you give them the same rewards, they will do it 25 times in a row and it's no problem. But if you give one of them grapes and the other one cucumber, and grapes are much better for them than cucumber, then the one who gets cucumber starts to refuse and becomes angry and irritated and is not happy with the division of things. And so even though that monkey would normally work for cucumber, he doesn't want to work when the partner is getting grapes. And so I got interested in inequity and fairness, which I think is also part of human morality, because our moral systems are designed, so to speak, to promote cooperation. And cooperation is only possible if there's some sort of equality in rewards. That's why at the moment, having billionaires sort of rule the world is a problem for many people, because it means that the ones who have everything, they also get everything, and they decide everything. And we are very unhappy about that situation. And I think the monkeys are very unhappy about situations of inequity also.
So now let's talk about social structure of animal societies. So usually when we look at animals, we see a social hierarchy in which an alpha male is on the top. And we think that the alpha male rules with tyranny and with power and just dominates the rest. And the rest cannot do anything about it. And they just have to be submissive to the alpha male. Is it an accurate picture of what is going on in the nature?
No, it's not. So the alpha male, for example, in chimpanzees, the alpha male can be the smallest male. Doesn't need to be the biggest and the strongest male. And that is because it's a political system. And so if the alpha male has good support from his friends or from certain females, he can be alpha male even if he's not the strongest. So the alpha male is accepted by the group generally. And if he's a bully, that happens. We sometimes have alpha males who are dictators. Then the group is usually not happy with them, because alpha males normally, they protect the underdog, they break up fights. They have a lot of empathy for individuals who are in trouble. And so they sort of keep the group together. And if an alpha male is not doing that, the group is usually not happy with him, and they are just waiting for the right occasion to get rid of him. And if there's another younger male who wants to take his position, they're going to support that younger male. It's almost like a democratic process there. Every primate group also has an alpha female, and these two positions don't exclude each other. There's an alpha male and an alpha female. And ideally, that happens in many groups, these two work together. They form a sort of team. The female is the head of the female hierarchy, and the male is the head of the male hierarchy. And then in bonobos, our closest relatives, apart from the chimpanzee, the females are dominant. And so the alpha female is actually higher ranking than the alpha male. So the picture is complex for our close relatives. In the bonobo, the females are collectively dominant. So the females are smaller than the males. So physically, a male is dominant over a female. And if you have in a zoo, sometimes that happens, you have one male and one female, then the male is dominant. As soon as you add a second female, the females become dominant, because they're very good at building coalitions. And so the picture is actually very complex. And I'm a bit unhappy with the alpha male image that people have nowadays, because I'm partly responsible. My first book, Chimpanzee Politics, introduced the concept to Washington, and then people ran away with it. And then alpha male became a sort of cardboard version, like a very domineering type of man. which is not what I intended it to be. In primatology, it just means the top male and the top female. And whether they are nice or not nice, that's really not an issue. It's whether they are at the top, yes or no.
We have, on one hand, chimpanzees who are aggressive and who are being dominated by alpha males. And on the other hand, bonobos who are not that aggressive, who are more cooperative, and they have alpha females. So how are we? So because both of these groups are our close relatives, as you say. So how we can orient ourselves with respect to these two different groups?
So we share with the bonobo the female bonding, which bonobos have very clearly, and I think human society has very clearly, and the erotic side of the bonobo. And then with chimpanzees, we share the male bonding, because chimpanzee males do a lot of things together. They are rivals and friends at the same time, and they travel together and they hunt together and things like that. So we have with the chimpanzee the male bonding, which is also very common in human society, and a bit of an aggressive nature. We are quite an aggressive species, I would say, more so than the bonobo. So we have things in common with both. We combine all that, and then we have one thing that is ours, uniquely ours, which is the nuclear family. So in chimps and bonobos, the females do all the work with the children. There's almost no male help. Males may sometimes protect them. That's a thing they can do, but other than that, they don't do much. And the males are very well capable of caring for the young, and we know that sometimes they adopt them when there's a female who has lost her life, and then they adopt sometimes the orphans. So they're very well capable of doing it, but they just don't do it. And we humans, we have evolved a nuclear family, which consists of a man and a woman, sometimes one man and multiple women, but the principle is that men get involved in caring for the young. And that's a uniquely human feature. It has allowed us to reduce the interval between births. So a chimpanzee or bonobo, the female gets a baby every 6 years or so. She cannot handle more than that because she's traveling through the forest. She cannot have 10 kids following her, so she has very few children. But since we have nuclear families, we have reduced that. And in hunter-gatherer groups, for example, the interval is 3 years or 4 years. And so we have reduced it. And our success in the world, if you call it a success, having 8 billion people, if that's our success, it comes from the nuclear family, yes.
Usually when us humans do an aggressive action, we say maybe don't act like animals. And what you just said about bonobos, that they are peaceful, makes me think if it's a fair thing to say. How aggressive are we as humans compared with other animals?
Yeah, we have genocides, and that's the occasional murder of one person by another person. That is not unusual in the animal kingdom, a deadly fight. But doing it at such a large scale as we do, and so systematically as we sometimes do, that's a horrible human characteristic. The only animals I know that potentially could do that are the ants. The ants have wars between enormous colonies, and they eradicate each other sometimes. But they are very distant from us. But in the animal kingdom, in the mammals, I don't think there's any mammal who will systematically start eradicating another group. And so that's something that humans do. And then we have developed weapons of mass destruction. And so we have the potential of massive killing. And we sometimes do that. And of course, if you look at the history of the world, and I'm not even just talking about World War II when the Holocaust happened, because there's many Holocausts that happened. It's not just the one in Europe. There's other ones that happened, and where one group systematically eradicates another group, and that's a human thing. That's uniquely human. The occasional aggressive outbursts of violence between individual people, that's maybe more comparable to what happens between animals.
there is an idea called social Darwinism that says that competition is natural. When we look at the nature, all we see is competition between different species, and only the fittest can survive, the rest will just perish. And they say that this is how we should organize our society as humans. We should just compete with each other. Only the successful one will survive and the rest will just die. So what do you think about this idea? And does it picture nature accurately?
Yeah. Social Darwinism came from Herbert Spencer, who adopted Darwin's ideas and then turned it into some sort of social theory. It doesn't come from Darwin himself. He didn't agree with it. But social Darwinism is the core of many conservative thinkers. And so in the time of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, that became the mantra. We need to be selfish. We need to work. Greed is a good saying. Competing is a good saying. And we need to build our society on these individual selfish interests, basically. And that was presented as natural, was presented as that's how nature works, so society should do the same thing. The problem is that nature doesn't work that way. Nature, it's a projection on nature. Nature is actually quite cooperative. So there are many animals who work through cooperation. So for example, lionesses, they hunt together. Wolves, they hunt together. Orcas, they hunt together. But also, if you're not a carnivore, the elephants, they travel together. The primates, they travel together. And they help each other. And they warn each other for danger. And they sometimes share food with each other. And so there's an enormous amount of cooperation in the animal kingdom. And I'm not even talking about the social insects, where it's very highly developed. And so the idea that individual interest underlies everything in nature is nonsense, because yes, there is plenty of competition. If you look for it, you're going to find a lot of competition in nature. But if you look for it, you're also going to find a lot of cooperation in nature. And that was forgotten by the conservatives, I think, is that cooperation is actually the core of society. You don't need societies if you don't cooperate. Then you could just each go their own way, you know. So it's a misrepresentation of how nature works. And that's also the reason why Darwin didn't agree with Herbert Spencer.
Based on this understanding of society as a competition, we humans tend to praise the winners usually, and we just humiliate the losers. So we just look up to those who are being successful, and then we just forget about those who we think are not successful, or even we can humiliate them. Is it the same in animals? Is there any animal that doesn't behave this way? I've heard that some animals comfort maybe the losers. Is it this thing?
Yeah, they may comfort the loser. I think in animal societies, as in human societies, it's better to be a winner than a loser. That's for sure. You get certain benefits as a winner. And that's why individuals want to win. But you don't need to trash the loser necessarily, because the loser still remains a member of your society. And the loser may be needed at other points in time also. So for you, even for your own interest, the loser may actually be someone you want to cooperate with. So for example, in the political system of the chimpanzees, if an alpha male becomes alpha male and he has been helped by certain males to get to that position, he has a certain obligation to share food with them, share females with them. Because if he doesn't do that, they may turn from supporters to opponents of him, and it becomes a very problematic situation. So he needs to keep his supporters happy. So winning, it doesn't always mean you can do anything you want and that the loser loses everything. The loser still remains part of the system and still remains an important component. And then in human society, we have other complexities, is that, let's say we have a contest between us and I win, but you are the expert in area X. You are, for example, much better with computers than I am, for example. then I'm still dependent on you. So even if you lose the contest for the top position in our corporation, you're still a specialist with extreme value, and I need to keep you on the team. So that's the situation in humans also very often, I think, is that winners cannot do anything they want. They have to be careful because they're still dependent on the whole system of which they are part.
Okay, you have done groundbreaking research on conflict resolution among primates. And nowadays, our world is full of human conflicts. So is there any lessons we can learn from animals in terms of how they resolve their conflicts?
Yeah, I've worked on reconciliation behavior. And in chimpanzees, it's common after a fight that individuals kiss and embrace and then groom. And in bonobos, it's usually sexual, but it's the same principle, is that you restore the relationship after the conflict. And in human society, it's a bit different because we have anonymous societies very often. Very often you don't know the other people very well. They're not part of your immediate group. Like in the primates, it's always individuals you have grown up with or you know very well. But that's not always the case in human society. And so that hampers conflict resolution, I think. And then in addition, we don't always have contact with each other. So I've worked, for example, with hospitals where they have conflicts in the operating rooms or between doctors and nurses or things like that. And since they don't see each other outside the operating room, in social contact or up a picnic or so, they don't see each other. There is no way for them to get to know each other and to resolve these conflicts in an alternative way. And the same is true for, let's say, Washington politicians. I hear that in the old days, the Democrats and the Republicans, they would in the evening go to a bar and drink together and laugh together. And then the next day they would do their political shenanigans again. But at least they had some sort of personal contact with the others. And they knew certain other politicians personally, maybe even their families or something like that. And I think that mitigates conflict and that helps the resolution process if there is conflict. And I think in our current society, things are polarizing to a degree. And there is this anonymity also that makes it hard to resolve conflicts. And I think we need to relearn probably how to do that. And you cannot do it digitally. People try that. They try to send text messages. And we are much too much primates to do these things by text message. We need to see each other in the eyes, sometimes touch each other, smell each other. We underestimate that also, that part of it. So we need to have some physical closeness. Otherwise, it's not going to work very well.
How much rationality is involved in our everyday decisions? Are we really that much rational animals, or are we driven by emotions like most other animals?
Well, nowadays with the animals, we usually also speak of rationality because they also need to make decisions and see which one is best for them and which one will have likely the most profitable outcome. And so in that sense, they are rational too. And emotions are usually underestimated by people. They underestimate the importance. I usually compare it like, what is the most important decision you take in your life? The most important one, I think, is who you're going to marry or who you're going to live with. Your partner is a very important decision. And is it a rational decision? No, it's an emotional decision. There's no good rational argument why this partner is better than that partner. So we take emotional decisions all the time. Even the most important decisions have usually an emotional component. And we underestimate that. I don't know why, maybe because the emotions are tied to the body and we want to move away from the body. Our mind, we think, is more important than the body, but the mind is sitting in a body, in your brain and in your body. The mind is part of you and a part of your body. In the gender discussion that often comes up, people say women are more emotional than men. I don't agree with that personally. I think, yes, women are plenty emotional, but I think men are plenty emotional too. If you ever look at a bunch of Dutch men who are watching a football game, what we call soccer here in the US, if you watch Dutchmen who watch a soccer game, you will see a range of emotions that's incredible and expressed extremely forcefully. And so emotions are part of all human beings, I would say. It is not one gender more than the other. And they affect everything we do.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us today.
Thank you.